Okay, so evolution. What is evolution? Evolution is population genetics. So it's the long-term change in the allele frequency of a population. So a gene pool is clearly the total sum of the genes in a population, and the long-term change in allele frequency in a population is evolution. So how do you calculate the allele frequency? So you have 100 diploid organisms that can all breed successfully. So if I just do a different colour, you have 100 diploid organisms that can all breed successfully. A gene has two possible alleles, big A, or dominant A, not big A, and recessive. So dominant and recessive. The frequency of allele A, dominant A, is P. And the frequency of allele recessive A is Q. So this is how you work out the frequency of the alleles. So if every gene is heterozygous, which is dominant A, recessive little a, it would be 100 divided by 200, or 50%. This is because P plus Q equals 1. So P being the dominant allele and the recessive allele being Q, that always adds up to 1. So that means that you get half and half in a heterozygous population. So it's important that it always equals 1. So the Hardy-Weinberg principle models the mathematical relationship between the alleles and the genotypes in a population that's stable. So this Hardy-Weinberg principle of using this has to be stable and not evolving. This is important because it's merely a theory, because all of the communities are evolving and hardly any communities are stable. There's always threats, environmental changes, so there's always going to be some disturbing factors in real life. But this principle helps, this Hardy-Weinberg principle helps measure the evolutionary changes. So the name of this principle is called Hardy, like Harry's ex-girlfriend, Hardy-Weinberg principle. So that's P, which is the dominant, plus Q, which is the recessive, always equals 1. It states that in a stable population with no disturbing factors, the allele frequencies will remain constant from one generation to the next without evolution. There's always, so the Hardy-Weinberg principle, just read for this. So we've got this here, which is the basics, and then its actual principle is P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. You're always going to be given this equation in the question, but just so you know what it is, so remember that the P is always dominant, the Q is always recessive, and it obviously is there here together. That's both of them added up, and that's times by 2, and then once again Q again. And once again, the answer is always having to be 1, so it always has to be 1. So P2 is the frequency of the homozygous dominant genotype. So P2, so this one is homozygous. It has to be homozygous because it has to be dominant. The dominant genotype. as the P, this one in the middle here, where they're both together, is the frequency of the heterogeneous. Heterozygous, not genus. Zygous. Heterozygous. Genotype, and then once again, this is the homozygous recessive. Homo recessive. So you've got homozygous dominant, homozygous heterozygous, and then you've got homozygous recessive. The recessive phenotypes are always easy to see and identify because obviously the you'd have to have, it always has to be homozygous for having two alleles because obviously it would be dominated otherwise. So they're quite easy to spot in an experiment. So the frequency of the recessive genotypes are Q2, which is this one here. And you always have to square root the recessive genotype to find the frequency of the recessive allele. So if you have the number, say you have 10 recessive gene in phenotype, so recessive blue-eyed cats or something, you'd have to square root that number, and that it would be the recessive number of the allele. Then you put them into the equation, and then you need to find all three of the genotypes or whatever's in the question. The Hardy-Weinberg principle assumes theoretical breeding populations of diploid organisms that is large and isolated. So this stable and not evolving needs to be also isolated. These evolving and isolated go together as if it was not in its own. It will interact with different extra organisms that are outside the community. So the Hardy-Weinberg principle assumes theoretical breeding of populations of diploid organisms that is large population, so there's not much inbreeding, and isolated, with random mating, no mutations, and no selection pressures. So that is random mating, no selection pressures, that's including like evolution, no selection pressures, and which leads to no mutations, because that would change the allele frequencies.